Hi, everybody. Today, we want to talk to you about the topic of working from home. It's obviously popular for obvious reasons. A lot of people say they're much more productive working from home, and I believe them. I've worked from home for a while. I think, Randy, you've started working from home as well since you left the military. It's awesome. The question, though, is it also awesome for your company if you work for a company? And are there any downsides to working from home? So today's episode is called Don't Work from Home Yourself Out of a Job. And I think we'll explain what we mean by that as we go through. So the first question is, I guess, who's in a position to work from home? Not everyone can do it. We talk about it like it is the end all be all for everyone. But I think I read some statistics that something like 15 to 20% of people max are ever going to be in a position to work from home. So I think we need to acknowledge that's because, you're in the military, you got to show up. You are working in a factory, you got to show up. You're driving a bus, you got to show up, et cetera. So a great deal of jobs, and actually the large majority of jobs, are not appropriate for work from home because it just doesn't suit the nature of the job. What does suit the work from home model? It is what Peter Drucker would have referred to as knowledge workers, people who are creating online content, who are writing, who are providing services that can be provided remotely. Lawyers can work from home, obviously, but a lot of other people can. Software writers, engineers, even to a certain extent. So if you're listening to this, we assume you are among that 15 to 20% of people who is even in a job that is appropriate for potentially working from home.
So, I actually got out of the military in 2019, right before, the year before COVID, June 2019. So all I know is what I heard. And what I heard was for most of the military is enlisted, right? They're basically the worker bees. And there was a period of time, I don't know how long, weeks, months, where everyone locked down because we didn't really know what COVID was going to bring to the table. And everyone just played video games and stayed in their barracks rooms or stayed home. I'm serious. This is anecdotal knowledge that I know, but I got it from a lot of sources. So military is not like you said, it's a hands-on job for the most part. And so what are they going to do when they send you home? You can't do there's no vehicles to be, for the mechanics to work on. There's no guns to be shot in the field while you're doing rehearsing missions. There's no helicopters to be flown in close quarters and all that stuff. Now, I think the officers were getting mentored by their senior officers, and maybe the senior enlisted were getting mentored and spoken to. And there was still the other problem with the other big thing in the military is because you have so many young men and women, like we're talking high school and early college, there's lots of shenanigans. So while everyone's supposed to go home and not, intermix with everyone, just like the rest of the world, and they had these secret parties where everyone was going and not masking and getting sick and stuff like that or whatever, and or would just go out and get in trouble and do stupid stuff. So it was basically an uptake of those kinds of conditions where all the supervisors were trying to figure out how to take care of all that stuff. My personal experience was I just started a new job in January of 2020. I went to this training in DC. I'm super positive that I got COVID. Because it was in a Hilton hotel in downtown DC. The training was at. Within 2 days, the 40 students, and the 4 instructors were all deathly ill. 2 of the instructors had to be replaced. They went home. 4 of the students never came out of their hotel room for the entire course and had to redo it at a later date. And I had a small flu, and I was the honor grad because everyone else died. And then as soon as I finished that, I said, hey, I'm going to take some time off because I had this cruise plan before you hired me. And they said, yeah, whatever. So I went on a cruise. I came back March 1st. before really COVID had hit the United States, but it was decimating Italy. So we went home and I called my boss and said, I'm stuck at home. I can't move to Germany like you want me to. They're like, okay, whatever. So I spent the rest of the year working from home at my new job, which I wasn't trained to work at home, but no one had ever anticipated this. So they were all trying to, for the first 4 months, I did nothing. I just got paid because they couldn't figure out how to adapt my job to the world. Because my job was to advise transitioning service members on their benefits when they got out, with their veteran benefits when they got out. And I was supposed to give presentations to rooms full of transitioning veterans. I really feel sorry for all the veterans who had to transition out of the military at that time. They weren't getting the information they needed. And so for me, working at home was great. I started my editing business at that time, and that's what I ended up moving into. As a company, well, my company was the U.S. government. They didn't get everything they could have out of me that time. They tried, but I don't know if you ever saw this meme where they had a mouse, so they knew someone knew. You ever see those? Or a fan connected to a mouse, so it moved your mouse back and forth, so you knew if someone knew you were working or something like that.
No, I mean, the reason to start with this, Randy, and it makes full sense, is first of all, like a lot of people, we were forced by exigent circumstances to figure out how to work from home. I mean, and the silver lining for COVID was that by virtue of the lockdown and the fact that businesses didn't want to go out of business, they experimented with figuring out which workers could work out of the office and who had to be in the office. Remember that whole discussion about who was an essential worker and who wasn't? That was an immensely practical question. Well, can you, in any way, even if it's not efficient, even if it's not optimal, can you perform your job or part of your job from outside the office for your own safety? So we did a lot of things over the last several years that we would never have done otherwise, but it really did open a lot of businesses' eyes and a lot of individuals' eyes to the idea that, yeah, actually, you can do your job away from the office. Now that comes with all of the downsides that you already mentioned, which is, well, some people are just going to sit there and play video games. Other people are going to get up to shenanigans because I don't want to even blame it on them being young. It's just they're not supervised and there's less control from management's perspective about what it is their employees are doing. So COVID formed the circumstances that created this massive social experiment. And like it or not, we had that experiment and it opened up businesses' eyes and individuals' eyes. And so what we're going to go through today is a little bit, all right, having had that experiment, how should you think about it? The obvious upside to the individual, maybe we should cover a few of those, right? Because there is obvious upside to the individual. You don't have a commute anymore. You get to work in your pajamas. You can start when you want, stop when you want. And by the way, I'm sure, just to be clear, most people absolutely take their job seriously and do a good job. And I believe them when they say they are more productive at home because they can feed the cat when they have to and not worry about it. If their kid's sick, it's not a problem. They're at home and they don't have to worry about it. They can get more done because they're not being interrupted and bothered by stupid coworkers who want to talk about last night's football game or a show they saw on TV. All of those things are real. And we do see already some evidence that there is a productivity boost from removing some of the friction associated with having to commute to a job, interact with colleagues, deal with hassles that you don't have when you're working from home. Are there other benefits that you experienced besides the ability to work on a second job while you should have been doing your main job?
Well, I wonder if there was ever a study done, because in my case, right, I had a supervisor and I didn't know the job really well. I just started, obviously, and I had to learn like what was important and things like that. But I think there's something to be said with, if you haven't, I mean, I wasn't a supervisor or even a sub supervisor. I was a worker bee. I was hired for a specific job. So my supervisor would give me tasks, say, hey, get this done. And I would do it in like 2 hours. Like if I was in the office, would it have taken me 2 hours? I don't know. Probably. Would I'm going, I mean, people go on smoke breaks, people go on coffee breaks, people take long lunches, people leave early, people come in late, and then going to meetings and talking to their, so do they get 2 hours of work done in 2 hours then, or they get interrupted, they lose their train of thought? But my supervisor talked to me in the morning, hey, we really need to get this done today. No problem, done. Now I'm editing a book because I have nothing else to do. So the question is, does the company think that they're getting their bang for their buck if they're getting the same amount of work? It's just taking them less time to do it because there were so many distractions in the office. And has anyone done a study like, hey, if I can do the job you hired me to do in 3 hours a day at home instead of 8 hours a day at work, is that, I mean, you're getting the same from me. And now I have peace of mind. I have more time to spend with my family. I don't know if there's any studies on that, or if they care. They're like, hey, you can do it 3. Well, we should give you like 5 hours more work at home, and then we'll get a lot more out of you, and you'll be really stressed.
I think there have been studies, Randy, and companies obviously care. They care a lot because employees are oftentimes one of the biggest fixed cost blocks that companies have. The way that companies improve their profitability is in part by improving productivity. So if you can get more work done in the same amount of time and I don't have to pay you more for it, well, that's a huge benefit to me. So the obvious answer to your question, if you got it done in 3 hours, then yes, you should be doing 5 hours more work. But that gets to one of the things people hate about office work and why working from home is so great. At the office, people will measure you by the obvious thing, which is, are you there? FaceTime. So if Randy is a good corporate citizen, shows up early and sits in his office for 8 or 10 hours a day, then I think he's productive. When actually that has nothing at all to say about whether you're productive. If you're at home and I only see your output by virtue of here's the tasks that you were supposed to do and I see what you complete, I actually have a much better measurement tool to say, oh, Randy's actually a great performer because he gets everything done twice as fast as that lazy bastard James. I don't know what he's doing, but he's twice as fast. So in a way, if companies are interested in measuring output and productivity, they should be the first ones to say work from home actually removes a lot of the distractions, a lot of the stuff that doesn't tell us anything about whether the person is good or not. So for me, those are marks in favor of work from home from both the individual's perspective and the company's perspective. You are happier as the individual because you have more freedom and flexibility. You lose some inefficiencies. The company's happier because it's actually focused on the right things in terms of your output, not superficial things that don't have any bearing on your productivity. So what are the downsides then? Why should you consider that it's not a great thing to work from home? I can think of a couple. One is both from the individual's perspective and from the company's perspective, you are losing something when you never come into contact with the company or your colleagues in the company. I guess team building and a sense of camaraderie is pretty important in the military for obvious reasons. You can talk about that. It's important in companies as well, because you have to work with your colleagues. You have to work in teams. You have to work towards common goals. If you have nothing in common with and don't even know your colleagues, it's a little bit hard to have any sense of emotional connection to them and to have any sense of commitment to them. It's just, yep, I got to get 3 more of this form XYZ filled out today. You do it and you don't care, which means you don't have any sense of loyalty necessarily. If someone comes along and says, hey, Randy, you have to fill out 3 XYZ forms. I'll pay you $20 an hour to do that instead of $19 an hour you're getting from those guys. You're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Perhaps that's good for the employee to be able to go to the highest bidder always. But I think you lose something when you no longer feel a sense of connection to either your colleagues or your company.
You're right. You're exactly right about, it depends on the job. I mean, most of my, work in the last couple of years of my job, I definitely could have done remotely. I mean, a lot of it was travel to Africa, and a lot of that was supposed to be face to face with senior military officials in the African military and different countries' militaries or embassy personnel to coordinate logistics and things like that. And all that stuff was shut down because of COVID. But while I had to be in certain meetings to put a face to the name, I was reporting back to people in the States online. I was sending them emails saying, hey, this is what we did today. I was giving them a situational report or something like that. And I guess that's not really remote work. If I have to go to a location, it's a mixture, right? I mean, I'm not in the office for 6 months because I'm in Nigeria, but I'm meeting with officials in that country. So I'm already doing a form of remote work because my boss is in a different place. My peers are at different places. I'm a one-man show.
I want to come back to the idea of some kind of hybrid work, not necessarily work from home, or I think you referred to it as remote work. I've also heard people refer to it as work from anywhere. There's something in the middle, which is a mix of sometime in the office, sometime remote. And I think that's probably the ideal for many people because it avoids the problem of losing connection with your colleagues, losing connection with your company, not feeling a sense of loyalty. Here's some other reasons why you might consider going into the office, even if you don't have to. And it is purely a matter of standing out and competitiveness. Your bosses have short attention spans. They see exactly what's in front of them, which is I got to get this thing done. And who do I have to get it done? And if there's someone in the hallway, they can just walk 10 feet down the carpet to poke their head in your office and say, hey, Randy, would you mind doing this for me? They will do it because it's easy and it's quick. If they have to set up a Zoom call and find time on your calendar and figure out who to ask, it's a barrier that will make it more likely the person looking to get work done is going to come to you if you're sitting in the office. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, James, wait a minute. That's exactly the best reason I ever heard for being out of the office. I don't want to get more work. I don't want to be volunteered to do projects. But remember what we said before about one of your key success factors. You do have to show up, you have to work, you have to volunteer. If you're in a position where your bosses think of you because you're there and your colleagues are not, you're going to get good work. You're going to get good projects just by virtue of that simple fact. You're there and they're not. The other thing I observed during COVID was, although 95% of employees at some companies were sent home, you know who was almost always still in the office?
The
Management
boss.
was there. They were there because they had to keep things running, because they were important, because the whole setup and infrastructure that we had to figure out at home, they already had set up at the office. They had IT staff helping them. They had an assistant helping them. Everything is set up to make the executive effective. And that works when they're in the office. So most of them continued to go into the office. Plus, I viewed it as sort of a status symbol. I'm important enough that I have to be in the office and there's no way for me to do my job from somewhere else. Lots of different reasons why you might come to the conclusion that, or the realization that management is still in the office. But I observed management staying in the office. You want to add?
Yeah, I want to flip this around, right? There are some jobs where there's some unique people that have the capabilities, education, skills to do that. And I think offering the management, offering this as a carrot, hey, you can work for us. There's so much chatter in my world because I am a remote worker. I work from home, freelance, ghostwriter, editor, writer stuff. There's so much chatter in my world about this digital nomad. And it's such a big thing that a lot of European countries and a lot of other countries too, but mostly European, the ones I'm looking at are European, they have digital nomad visas. You can get up, a year at a time, renew 3 times in a row. You don't pay any taxes. You just pay taxes wherever your work is in US for most of us. And you basically live there and exist there, and you have to prove that you can make enough money in your digital work, whether you work for yourself or another company, and they give you a visa for a year, which is actually not that easy to come by if you don't have a job in this country. If you can't prove, a minimum salary of 1.5 of the minimum wage or something like that, like $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month or something. So, but this is a really good carrot for a lot of families or, single people who want to travel the world and do their work and or just stay home and be with their family because their other spouse has to work out of the house and they need someone to take care of the kids. And if you're looking to entice people with specific skills and that job set allows you to work at home and you're fine with not having them under your thumb, this is another way to look at this
I agree. And a lot of companies are using the ability for employees to work remotely as a significant carrot. And it is one for all the reasons you just said. A lot of people just taking the family situation, right? Getting both spouses or both partners in a relationship the ability to work, especially when you're moving, is not at all easy. So if one says, yeah, look, I can do my job from anywhere, so we'll focus on getting you the in-person job, or both can work remotely, that's really a great situation because it provides a ton of flexibility. So not only are companies figuring out, hey, I can make myself look more attractive to prospective employees if I offer remote work or hybrid work, a lot of employees have seen the beauty of it and said, hey, I'm going to insist upon it. If you want my valuable skills, you must allow me to work remotely. And especially during COVID, and even now that it's the severity of the lockdowns have eased, I think the bargaining power has shifted somewhat to employees who say, you know what, screw you, I can do what I want. If you won't let me work remotely, somebody else who's an attractive employer will. That's actually why I think this topic is so important to talk about and why we are talking about it. I would say be careful what you wish for. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So one, I already pointed out that you have potentially a competitive advantage by nonetheless going in and hanging around with the people who are in the office for the reasons we just discussed. So you might be doing perfectly fine working remotely in a big organization. It suits your needs perfectly. But guess what? You're not going to get the same opportunities. You're not going to advance at the same rate. Now, you might say, I don't care. That's not important to me, in which case remote work is good for you. But there's a second factor to watch out for, which is this. What does the company start to think when it looks at its remote workforce? It's focused on two things and two things only. Productivity, like we were saying before, how many forms XYZ does Randy fill in 3 hours? And cost, how much does it cost me to get those 3 XYZ forms filled in? You are not a person anymore. You are an input. I don't want to exaggerate it too much, but at some level, the company is just saying, how do I get my needs met? Okay, well, I have this group of people who meets those needs. And then every year the CFO comes in and they have a budget meeting and the CFO says, well, you know, those remote workers are kind of expensive. I still pay them Silicon Valley salaries. They're costing me on average $200 an hour. Is there a cheaper way to do it? And when it is a question of, is there someone anywhere in the world providing that service more cheaply? The answer is almost always, for all of you listening from any Western country, the answer is almost always going to be, yeah, actually there is. To give you an example, even very sophisticated stuff like intellectual property work. We hire patent attorneys at my old company all over the world, including the most expensive places in the world, like the US and Germany and Switzerland. These people are really, really good at what they do, but they're exceptionally expensive. It turns out there are people in other countries that have developed similar expertise and are willing to sell it for dramatically less. So it turns out I could hire patent attorneys in India for 1/10 the cost that I could in Switzerland. Now, I like my Swiss patent attorneys, but I got to tell you, that is a tempting cost differential, because if I can measure their output, how many patents did you file? How many claims did you prosecute? How many office actions did you respond to? Very measurable, right? Very specific output, even though it's intellectual, high quality work. I could go to India and say, all right, how many patents can you write? How many files can you prosecute? How many office actions can you answer? All of a sudden, remote work means that it's easier to think of you as interchangeable. That's my point. And unless you are the low cost value proposition, you are potentially just in this lovely golden age of the company needs you and hasn't figured out how to replace you. But in a couple of years, they will figure out how to replace you if all you are is output at the end of a screen. So unless your value proposition is really unique, and as soon as you open up competition to the entire world, it's really hard to say that you're truly unique, I would say be careful what you're doing by insisting on working from home. Does that make sense to you, Randy?
No, it does. And I would also kind of throw these challenges to think about if you're pursuing working from home, you know, and it depends on the job, obviously, but you'll have a lot less complete understanding of how a company works when you're at home, because when you need to, share ideas between divisions, or get the expertise from the logistics division, or talk to the doohickey guy, making face-to-face, making a relationship with those guys, understanding what they actually do, as opposed to now you have a phone number. Hey, Bert told me to call you because I got this problem. But when you actually see them, you can actually understand what that part of the company actually does and how they might actually help you in other ways. But if you just know them as he's the doohickey guy, that's all you're going to ever ask for him, because you have no idea what the other capabilities of the rest of the company are. So I think it makes it harder for you to, I don't know, use all the assets that are available to you when you're working from home, because you just really, unless I've already been working for this company for a long time, or in the industry for a long time, and you have this knowledge already, especially as a younger person entering the workforce. I know, even in the military, it took me a good 10 years to figure out what departments are in charge of, legal, and who's running the show, and what legal can do for me, and what, all the supply guys can do for me, and all these different pieces of the puzzle, that if I had been with just a phone number like this guy, I know this guy can get me free notebooks, because that's what the government gives me, free notebooks to write my notes on. But I don't know all the other great stuff he can do for me, then it's really limiting.
I think that's a really good addition and an excellent point, Randy. If you want to improve your skills as an employee in any role, then use all the assets that you have available to you. And one of the assets is the colleagues that can help you in unexpected ways. We had a employee restaurant at our office in Switzerland, and I loved going to the restaurant, not just because I like to eat, but because I would have these random encounters with people that I didn't usually see. So I'd meet somebody from production and ask him what's going on, and I'd learn something. I'd meet something from an area of the business I hadn't talked to in a while, and I'd say, how's the business going? And I'd learn something. And almost always it was a serendipitous encounter that, for me, it also took many years to really get good at my job and figure out who could help me. But even after 20 years, I was still surprised at how great these random, serendipitous encounters were for enhancing my ability to do my job better, because I learned something I didn't know. I found out about an issue I didn't know about. So I like that point a lot. If your objective is only to improve your skills and get better at your job, interacting with your fellow employees and your colleagues is actually not just an annoyance. Sometimes it really helps you. So agreed, that's a nice perspective to bring to this debate. We assume you are interested in improving your skills, so not just getting paid at the end of the day for rote output. All right, so we've talked about how work from home came about, why it expanded during COVID, why your company might like it, why you might like it, some pros, some cons. Are there any aspects to work from home that we haven't covered that people might need to hear about, or that we think should be expressed?
I think when you're considering working from home, you really need to make a pace plan, a contingency plans, because once you're at home, especially if you have family, people see you at home just like they see in your office. Instead of your boss coming over and like, hey, I need to get this done, it's your wife or your partner or your dog or your, all these other people in your life that they don't interact with you till you come home from work, now see you as, well, you're here, so can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? And so this is more a consideration if you are working at home, or if you think working at home is better than working in the office. I think a lot of people who can work at home did it during COVID, so they may have experienced this and got through it. But if you haven't had that pleasure of working at home, you need to think about how you're going to separate your work time from everything else that's going on around you. I mean, you're going to be in a Zoom call and the doorbell's going to ring because the mailman's got to get a sign for something, and that they always come at the wrong time, believe me. Or, all these distractions.
You're on an important Zoom call and your kid comes in the room and there's been lots of videos.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to figure out how that's going to work and where you're going to work. There's a lot of considerations before, like, I get to work at home. I think a lot of people figured that out when we first started, You had to find your own office space. You had to, tell people, hey, don't bother daddy between these hours. And there was probably discussions between partners about, hey, I don't have to do all the housework because you're here or whatever. I'm sure there's a lot of difficult discussions that people had to have. And these are considerations if you are considering taking a job that you work from home or asking if you can work home for more. There's a transitional stage before it becomes easier that you have to consider.
I like that concept, Randy. And the way I think about it is you want to make sure that you're thinking about how to be competitive in whatever environment you're in. And if you're working at home, to be competitive, you got to have additional factors that you consider. How do I avoid distractions? How do I make sure that I stay focused? How do I, present myself in a professional way? And if you approach your job seriously, then whether you're working at home, working partly at home, working remotely, going only into the office, the same type of thought process is applicable. What's the right way for me? What's the best way for me to optimize my situation? Just because you're working from home and no one is necessarily looking over your shoulder doesn't make any of those questions go away. So yes, I agree with that point.
And then kind of with that thought is, how do you divide your personal from your professional life? Because it's all in the same spot now. Before you could say, hey, I'm off work, I'm at home, don't bug me. But now, since your office is your home, you have to be able to set up those boundaries with the people you work with, and everyone needs to, respect each other's time and space.
Yeah, ironically, a big risk of work from home is not being able to turn off when you should. So rather than employees working less, some of them end up working a great deal more. And I guess everyone has to find their own balance. But the point here is that it's a new situation and you got to bring a little bit of care and thought into how you're going to be successful in that environment. So I guess we have concluded that there is no right answer, that there's pros and cons to both settings. And hopefully we've given you some ideas for how to be successful as you approach this uncertain era of where people are going to get work done. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See you next time. We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.